welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on the 6th and final episode of Gunbuster. If you'd like to watch along, start watching now. So we start off pretty strong by showing that it's immediately 15 years later. And once again, we're actually in the future, this being, of course, the year 2048. Now, I feel like there's something that needs to be addressed. This last episode was intentionally done in black and white, and I think there's a couple reasons behind it. It's purely an artistic choice because it wasn't merely that they photographed the cells in black and white for this episode. The cells were actually inked in black and white, meaning all the various shades of gray had to be mixed with varying ratios of black ink and white ink. Like, I'm not an animator. I have no real artistic talent, but this had to have been an absolute soul-crushing amount of work. But I think it ultimately serves a couple purposes. Because on the one hand, I think it lends a dramatic weight, an extra weight, that wouldn't immediately be apparent. But on the other hand, it also sort of reminds me of it being historical. I'm young enough where I am aware of black and white films and that those were the norm. But at the same time, I've never lived in a time or place where those were being made. So this sort of imparts to me a sense that it's almost meant to be historical. Like a historical record or something that was made in the past. Obviously, Gunbuster being made in the late 80s is something that was made in the past. But it's this weird juxtaposition of it taking place in the future, but deliberately appearing as though it were from the past. I think it's trying to convey almost a sense of nostalgia in doing so. Not to keep harping on the black and white aspect, but I really have to say, the masterful way that they've mixed all the shades of gray, it seems to me that you could treat this as any other black and white film and colorize it, and all the colors would make sense. It just strikes me as an incredible artistic achievement, especially in the medium of animation, which, as I understand it, is a very labor-intensive thing, especially back in the day with traditional cell animation. So back with the plot, it seems things are complex. Humanity is essentially being forced into another last stand. Their options are essentially a gigantic black hole bomb that would, in all likelihood, swallow up Earth and the solar system as well, or lie down and die. And this black hole bomb, also known as Buster Machine Number 3, is so incredibly massive that it's sort of on the same order of magnitude as the planet Earth itself, which should tell you that it's a weapon of unparalleled destructive power. Nuclear weapons are nothing in the face of something like that. So the other sort of elephant in the room here, which has now only just become apparent, is that we're just seeing Noriko now, and she looks exactly the same as ever she had, whereas Kazumi is very clearly older. So it seems like while those 15 years had passed, Kazumi was on Earth, but Noriko was continuing to jet about in space. So for all the 15 years that might have passed on Earth, you know, who knows how much Noriko aged by, months, a couple years at most? So it also seems like Noriko's under the impression that given Kazumi's age, she won't be involved with the Buster Machine going forward. Given how she's currently in the cockpit of a machine as we speak, it seems like that's obviously not going to be the case. As a matter of fact, she seems to be delivering the black hole bomb from Earth to the fleet herself. I guess it could only be expected that a pilot of her caliber would be used for something like that. But at the same time, it strikes me as a bit odd. One would think that the black hole bomb, transporting that would be, I guess, kind of like a trucker transporting something in a big rig rather than the more fighter pilot-esque role that Noriko and Kazumi take. But on the other hand, it is also a weapon. I mean, all of this is purely hypothetical and fictional anyway, so who really knows? So just like that, the black hole bomb shows up, and it immediately dwarfs everything nearby it. Like, even the captain is, I guess, unnerved, for want of a better term, at its size. Granted, he hasn't been on Earth. He hasn't seen the technological developments. I mean, even if we take the world you, the listener, and I currently live in, 15 years of technological progress is nothing to sneeze at. Now, imagine what's going on in this sci-fi show. The technological advancement would be absolutely insane. So it seems like Noriko almost doesn't recognize Kazumi since the 15 years elapsed. So there we go. Kazumi comes right out with it. Noriko's only experienced 6 months of time. That's crazy. 25 years have passed in-universe, and Noriko is, at most, 1 year older. It's totally insane. She's received a letter from her friend Kimiko, and she writes a letter to say that my daughter, who you met when she was 3, is now turning 18 and is older than you. And to set a really melancholy tone, Kimiko knows that due to Noriko's mission, she'll likely not return in Kimiko's lifetime. And so she just sort of asks, if at all possible, could you at least return during my daughter's lifetime? Man, that is probably the worst part of all this relativistic travel. So back to some of the science fiction aspects of this. Buster Machine number 3, the black hole bomb, is in fact made from Jupiter, which suggests to me they've taken the planet Jupiter and they've compressed it into something smaller than the Earth. So it seems to me that it's basically right on the cusp of forming a black hole. I'd have to do some looking into it, but I'm pretty sure that's fairly accurate with how we understand black holes these days, in that if you were to compress Jupiter into about the size they've done here, it would be pretty close to forming a black hole, and certainly a star. I can only assume they've got some fantastical physics reason as to why it hasn't undergone stellar fusion to begin forming a star, but I guess it's not super important considering they're planning on wiping out the aliens wholesale. So if the fleet was bad before with 100 million, the aliens now number 6 billion in their fleet. So this is really where the rubber hits the road here. You know, they need to defend this bomb and get it to where it needs to be before it detonates. Especially because I can only assume if you're within the radius, that means you're getting sucked into the black hole, which, interestingly enough, we don't really know what happens, but, you know, we can only assume it's not a pleasant experience. The interesting thing is that black holes, much like near light speed travel, also affect time in weird ways. So one could make the argument that the closer you get to a black hole, the slower time moves for you relative to anyone else. So if you're being sucked into a black hole, one could make the case that time would eventually stop moving for you altogether. Or at least slow to such a crawl that it is functionally stopped. All in all, it doesn't seem like a very pleasant experience. So just like humanity is taking this whole business seriously, so are the aliens. They're pulling out all the stops to, I guess, stop this fleet from accomplishing its goals. Interestingly, they're even resorting to suicidal attacks to try and disable the bomb. So the aliens haven't really been presented as sapient or sentient or anything like that. But they seem to be aware that the bomb is the big threat here, and they need to do something about that post-haste. So this is a pretty tense situation. Essentially, the black hole bomb is safe, relatively for now, but it's only a matter of time before the aliens start damaging it. Yeah, this scene sort of reminds me of Evangelion in a weird prototypical sort of way, where this somewhat peaceful music is being contrasted with horrible scenes of battle and carnage. It seems to me that this is something Hideaki Anno is fond of doing. since he was responsible for this and later went on to direct Evangelion. But it's interesting that this segment is essentially a montage of still images. It almost puts me in mind of it being a sort of collage of photographs, if that makes any sense. Like these are the only images we have of the battle, and we've just sort of got them all spread out. So the upshot is, they've survived, but basically everything is somewhere between moderately damaged or just flat out destroyed. The black hole bomb, fortunately, has survived, so things are still good in that regard. I have to say, all this animated carnage is rather incredible. Because I know animating mechanical objects is rather difficult, but that they show mechanical objects that have been rent and torn to pieces, I guess I just appreciate it. So here's the moment of truth. The black hole bomb is getting ready to detonate. And just like that, the timer hits 0 and keeps on going. As fate would have it, most of the generators that would start the reaction have come online, but just enough of them have failed to make the whole thing a big wasted effort. I find it interesting that everybody is immediately pessimistic. You know, one would think they would at least try and think up a plan before immediately despairing. So Noriko presents an idea. The Gunbuster has the equipment necessary to jumpstart the bomb, so we'll do it. Naturally, the captain is a little reticent to send 2 live people in to act as a fuse, but they're not having any of it. You know, this is for the fate of the Earth. So, you know, it'll be a nice quick thing. Go, detonate the bomb, get back to Earth in one piece. So already, the music is sort of tipping you off a little bit. It's kind of like that track that played when Noriko went out in Gunbuster for the first time and was preparing to potentially meet her doom. Vaguely melancholy with strings and all that. So the situation still isn't particularly good in spite of the momentary reprieve. The aliens would seem to be massing another fleet to try and wipe humanity out in one go. So it would seem as though if the Gunbuster can activate the bomb here, it's truly their only chance. Now, this is actually something I had forgotten about. Jung actually follows Gunbuster in, and she's even prepared to die from the pressure. But, she seems to know the exact stakes here. Even if Gunbuster is successful, decades or centuries longer than they anticipated will elapse for them to return to Earth. And Jung is not willing to let that happen. But at the same time, Kazumi and Noriko are accepting this fate willingly. You almost feel like Jung is jinxing it. When you get back, I'll welcome you back warmly with a nice big welcome back. Kazumi even went as far as to say, I'm not going to say goodbye because this isn't goodbye, I'll see you again. I think this is a neat artistic rendering of what is essentially a proto-black hole here. It's sort of, at least when rendered in black and white, seems to me like it's essentially the deep sea. This deep underwater place where no sunlight can reach. And they've even sort of produced this wobbly effect as if it were underwater. That is sort of reserved in films for underwater scenes. So here we go. This scene always guts me. Noriko doesn't do anything in half measures anymore. She rips off the Gunbuster's armor plating to gain access to its generator. That's just so incredibly gnarly, and she tears it out. It really resembles like a person tearing open their own ribcage and pulling out their still beating heart. That's just a really gnarly scene. So just like that, Gunbuster once again pulls through. It started the reaction, everything's going well, the bomb's gonna go off, humanity lives to fight another day. So this is the tricky part. They need to get out of Dodge post-haste. But considering this is a black hole, that's, I would think, especially risky business. I think it's also notable that the song that played when Noriko was preparing to face her death in episode 4 is playing again now. She had that same sort of resolve where, this could be the end, but I will accept that and face it head on. I think it's very telling that Noriko's last words before the black hole seemingly engulfed them is an apology to Kimiko, saying that, I'm sorry, I'll never see you again. Oh man, this scene guts me every time. So the black hole worked. It engulfed whatever chunk of the galaxy or the supercluster it was. But rather than decades or centuries, it's 12,000 years later. So after 12,000 years, Noriko and Kazumi in the utterly destroyed ruins of Gunbuster have finally reached Earth again. It's so horrible. You know, they left in the 3rd millennium and have returned in the 15th millennium, and the Earth is all but unrecognizable to them. They can't recognize the land masses. There are no lights on the planet. It's as if they've returned to a dead world. Turns out Yun was telling the truth. She has indeed welcomed them back. Oh, this kills me. For 12,000 years, humanity has maintained a vigil. And even when they spell out "Welcome back" with the lights, some of the letters were backwards. You know, the language they use to welcome them back has since become a dead language that they don't even know they're spelling it wrong. But they do it anyways to welcome back the heroes who saved the world. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.